It all started with the burning of the sky. Nobody knew where they came from at first. One second, Earth was bustling like normal. Kids were going to school, workers were complaining about Monday mornings, and the old-timers were sitting in diners sipping bad coffee and talking about better days. Then the sky ripped open like some giant claw had shredded it, and the ships poured through. Big, ugly things made of black metal, humming with a sound that made your bones vibrate. At first, people thought it was just some weird atmospheric phenomenon. Maybe a government experiment gone wrong. It wasn't until the first city went dark, not from a power outage, but because something wiped it off the map, that everyone understood. This wasn't a glitch. It wasn't a mistake. It was war. They didn't talk to us. No message, no warning. They just started slaughtering. New York, Tokyo, Paris, gone. Entire cities erased like chalk from a blackboard. The world governments panicked, tried everything, fired nukes at the ships, scrambled every fighter jet in the sky. Nothing worked. Their tech was beyond anything we had. Every missile got shot down mid-air. Every jet got fried before it even reached the enemy. People started losing hope fast. You could feel it, a heavy sort of fear that crawled into your bones and sat there, cold and thick. We were ants fighting a boot, and the boot wasn't even bothering to look down. It might have ended there. Earth might have just been another broken world to add to their collection. If it wasn't for one simple fact. Humans don't quit, not when it matters, especially not when we're cornered. They attacked a small town in Montana next. You wouldn't even find it on most maps, a blip. Nobody important lived there, no strategic value. But what they didn't know was that in that little forgotten town lived a retired engineer named Marcus Lane. And Marcus had spent 30 years designing weapons for the military. Weapons he wasn't supposed to talk about. Weapons that were so dangerous, most governments had buried them deep underground, afraid of what might happen if they ever got used. When the ships came to his town, Marcus didn't run. He didn't hide. He climbed into the basement where he kept his bad ideas and got to work. It took him 3 days. 3 days of welding and wiring and cursing under his breath. Meanwhile, the world was burning. More cities gone. Billions dead. The invaders still didn't say a word. Just kept stomping on us like we weren't even worth the trouble. Then, Marcus finished. The device looked like a giant, rusty satellite dish bolted to a half-broken pickup truck. It didn't look like much. Honestly, if you saw it, you'd think it was a junkyard project made by some drunk redneck trying to get better TV reception. But when he turned it on and pointed it at the nearest ship, the sky itself seemed to crack. One pulse, one single shot. The alien ship didn't explode. It didn't crash. It ceased to exist. Not a scrap of metal fell, not a flicker of flame. 1 second it was there, this huge, terrifying war machine, and the next it was just gone. Like it had never been real in the first place. The rest of the ships stopped moving. You could almost hear their confusion. For the first time since they arrived, they hesitated. Marcus grabbed an old CB radio, rigged it into the dish's control panel, and broadcast a message straight into the invaders' communication network. His voice, rough and shaking but clear as a bell, went out across the stars. Earth to the invaders, attack again, and face total annihilation. Silence stretched for what felt like forever. Then, like a tide pulling back, the ships turned. Without a sound, they retreated into the hole they'd torn in the sky. Within minutes, they were gone. The tier sealed up behind them, leaving only clear blue above. The world was still smoldering. Millions were still mourning. But for the first time in what felt like forever, there was hope, too. Because Earth had given them a warning. And this time, we meant it. After the last of the alien ships vanished, The world didn't just breathe a sigh of relief. It gasped like a drowning man finally breaking the surface. People spilled into the streets, some laughing hysterically, some crying, others just standing there, staring at the sky like they couldn't quite believe it was over. News anchors stumbled over their words, desperately trying to explain what had happened, but no one had a clue. All they knew was that the killing had stopped. For now. But Marcus Lane knew better. Sitting in the battered pickup truck, staring at the smoking, humming dish bolted to its roof, he knew it wasn't over. Not really. It was just the beginning. He hadn't beaten them. He'd scared them. And fear was a temporary thing. They'd be back. Smarter. Angrier. The problem was, Earth didn't have another Marcus Lane hiding in every town. And worse, nobody had a clue how the device he built even worked, including Marcus himself. He had thrown together old scraps of abandoned military projects, wild theories banned for being too dangerous, and a few lucky guesses fueled by pure desperation. It was a miracle the thing hadn't just vaporized him when he fired it, and now the world's leaders wanted it. Within hours, helicopters thundered over Marcus's little town. Black-suited men in mirrored sunglasses flooded the streets, pushing through crowds of dazed survivors. They didn't come offering thanks or help. They came with orders, confiscation, dissection, control. A team from the United Nations, the United States government, the European Union, even some groups Marcus had never heard of, all descended on him like vultures. They demanded he hand over the device. They waved legal papers, threatened him with charges, tried to talk about global security. Marcus just sat on the porch of his crumbling house, a shotgun resting lazily across his lap, and didn't say a word. For 2 days, they argued. They tried everything: persuasion, bribery, intimidation. Some even hinted that accidents happen when people don't cooperate. Marcus smiled at that, a tired, broken smile. "You think you scare me?" he said once, staring down a man with too many medals pinned to his chest. "I stared into the end of the world, saw it looking back at me. You're just ants screaming at the boot." When they finally realized he wasn't going to give them the weapon, they made their move at night. Black helicopters, masked soldiers, silencers clicking into place. No witnesses, no trial. Just a neat, quiet removal. They didn't expect the whole town to be waiting for them. Every man, woman, and child, armed to the teeth. Hunting rifles, shotguns, even homemade Molotovs clutched in shaking hands. 1,000 people who had lived through hell, who had seen their cities burn, and decided they weren't going to bow to another master. Not alien, not human. The soldiers hesitated. Orders crackled over radios. Someone screamed. A shot rang out. It didn't matter from which side. And chaos exploded. It was a massacre, but not the one they expected. The town fought like cornered wolves. They knew every back alley, every hiding spot, every ridge and tree and hill. And they fought dirty. Guerrilla warfare straight from the history books. Homemade traps, hit-and-run tactics. In the end, the government soldiers limped away, battered and broken. They didn't get the device. They didn't even get a body count. They just left, heads hanging, their pride bleeding out into the dust. And the world? The world watched it all unfold on 1,000 shaky cell phone videos, uploaded to every platform imaginable before the networks could bury them. Marcus Lane became a legend overnight. The man who saved the Earth, and then told the powers that be to go to hell. And somewhere, beyond the stars, the invaders watched too. They saw a planet that didn't just survive. It fought back. It refused to be conquered. They sent a message of their own, hidden in the radio waves of deep space, picked up by trembling satellites on Earth's edge. Just 6 words, burned into humanity's memory forever. We will return. Stronger. Smarter. Marcus sat on his porch, cleaning his shotgun under a blood-red sunset, and smiled that same tired smile. "Let him come," he muttered. In the months that followed, the world changed. It wasn't just the fear that lingered in the air, thick and suffocating, like a storm on the horizon. It was the knowledge that humanity had been given a chance, a rare and fragile chance, to show the universe that we weren't just another dying species waiting for extinction, and we had to make it count. The global response was swift and brutal. Governments that once squabbled over borders and resources now united in a common goal: prepare for the aliens' return. There was no time for politics, no time for bureaucracy, only survival. The weapons Marcus had created, or rather the method by which they had been created, became humanity's best-kept secret. It was a race to reverse engineer his device, to understand the science behind it. The UN set up a covert task force, made up of the world's most brilliant minds. But even they struggled. Marcus had built it in a frenzy, fueled by desperation, but he hadn't kept a single record. It was all in his head. They called it the Project. Meanwhile, the rest of humanity adjusted. Cities rebuilt. Trade routes reopened. Life went on, but it wasn't the same. Everyone knew the day was coming. We could hear it in the rumors, see it in the eyes of the leaders. People no longer talked about the good old days before the invasion. They talked about the weapons, the training, the preparations, and every night, 1,000 people prayed that the aliens wouldn't return tomorrow. In Montana, Marcus Lane became more than just a hero. He became the symbol of Earth's defiance, a symbol of hope, but also a symbol of what might be lost if they failed. In his small town, they erected a monument in his honor, a rusted piece of the alien ship, hanging like a trophy. Below it, an inscription: "To the man who gave humanity a fighting chance." But Marcus, he didn't care for monuments. He stayed in his house, kept to himself, and made sure his truck was ready. He had known from the moment he sent that message to the invaders that they would come back. And this time, they wouldn't be as easy to beat. He had prepared the town for what came next, for the real war, the one that would decide whether Earth was truly ready to defend itself or if it would fall again. Marcus Lane wasn't just a survivor anymore. He was a leader. On the outside, he looked like a grizzled old man in worn-out clothes with a heavy shotgun slung over his shoulder. But there was a fire in his eyes. He wasn't going to let Earth fall. He wasn't going to let them think they could just come in and wipe us out again. In the sprawling underground bunkers built by military engineers, soldiers trained, and civilians too, everyone, because they knew, the aliens had learned, they wouldn't underestimate humanity again. And just when it seemed like the world might get a reprieve, that the invaders might forget about us and move on to easier conquests, a signal was detected. A warning, the kind of message that shook you to your core. 1,000 voices, all speaking at once, all across every frequency, from the farthest corners of space, came together in one unholy symphony. And this time, the message wasn't a threat, it was a statement, a declaration. We are coming, and this time you will pay for your defiance. You will pay for thinking you can beat us. It wasn't a warning anymore. It was an ultimatum. This time the aliens weren't just sending ships, they were sending everything. On Earth, the countdown began. The invaders' ships appeared again, appearing like shadows in the sky, no longer singular threats, but an entire fleet, massive and seemingly endless. And they weren't alone. There were new ships, larger, faster, and more deadly, and on those ships there were thousands of soldiers. Thousands of beings who had never seen a planet like Earth, who had never seen humans who didn't bow or grovel. And Marcus Lane? He didn't flinch. He stood on the porch of his house, watching the sky grow dark with the ships. The people of the town stood with him, watching, waiting, because they had seen this before. and they weren't about to let it happen again. This time, humanity wasn't going to hide. It wasn't going to wait for rescue. It wasn't going to beg for mercy. This time, the invaders would meet Earth's wrath, and they would learn the true meaning of the word defiance. Marcus took a deep breath, lifted his shotgun, and said one last thing before the battle began. "You wanted a fight? Well, now you've got one." The invasion didn't begin with explosions. It didn't begin with a massive army storming across the surface of the Earth. No, it began with something far worse, the anticipation of what was coming. For the first time in history, Earth wasn't just facing an enemy. It was facing the unknown. Every government, every military, and every citizen had prepared for an attack. But how do you prepare for something so vast, so terrifying, that it makes you question your place in the universe? The ships filled the sky for days before they finally landed. And when they did, the world was forced to confront the full scale of the threat. They didn't just land in one place. They landed everywhere. Cities, deserts, the open ocean, the mountains, hundreds, maybe thousands of craft, each one large enough to blot out the sun. They spread across the globe, their sheer size dwarfing anything humanity had ever seen. Each ship was surrounded by a dark, pulsating energy field that made the air hum and crackle. And then, silence. For the first time since the invasion began, there was no violence, no shots fired, nothing. The invaders simply watched. And as they did, humanity waited in agonizing silence. The world's armies stood poised, ready to strike, but none of them had the firepower to touch those ships. The last time, Earth had fought on luck, on the ingenuity of a single man. This time, humanity had nothing to fight with, except each other. The human race, under the pressure of extinction, fell into chaos. Old divisions resurfaced, governments dissolved into bickering, militaries went rogue, and once united nations crumbled under the pressure. Everyone had their own plans for dealing with the invaders. Some called for surrender, thinking that perhaps Earth's resources would be spared if they offered themselves up. Others argued that humanity had no choice but to go down fighting. The debates raged across the globe, from the highest political summits to the quietest backyards. Marcus Lane, however, had no time for debates. The old man who had once saved his town from an alien assault now had a more difficult task ahead. He had to rally the last remaining remnants of humanity to unite the fractured pieces of Earth's resistance. He had already seen the first signs of disarray. But as he looked up at the sky, at the ships that loomed like giants on the edge of the world, he knew that humanity couldn't afford to fail. Not now. Not when they were this close to losing everything. Marcus set out on a mission of his own. The project had made some progress. Scientists had finally managed to reverse engineer the basics of his weapon, but the process was slow. So, Marcus made the call. It was time to find more. Find anything that could be used to build something bigger, something stronger. He traveled to the last military bunkers still operating, meeting with generals, old warlords, and scientists from every corner of the Earth. What he was proposing sounded impossible. He wasn't just looking for weapons. He was looking for a way to turn the tide of war. And for that, he needed collaboration, something humanity had forgotten how to do after decades of division. It took weeks, but Marcus began to see the first signs of unity, not because the world governments finally agreed, but because the people did. Soldiers, civilians, engineers, farmers, scientists, and even a few former enemies started working together. They had no choice. The aliens were coming, but Marcus wasn't the only one working. Deep within the alien ships, something else was happening, something far darker. Inside the largest of the alien craft, the commander of the fleet, a being taller than any human could imagine, with dark skin that shimmered like polished obsidian, stood silently before a massive viewing screen. It showed images of Earth's cities, of the human resistance forces, of the broken planet that had once been home to billions. The commander's fingers twitched, and the screen flickered. A distorted voice buzzed in the room, the sound of their own alien language. "Earth resists," the voice hissed. "The humans believe they can defeat us, but they do not understand. We are not here for conquest. We are here for eradication." The commander didn't respond immediately. It had been a long time since the aliens had encountered a species that didn't just roll over and die. This world, these humans, had thrown their very existence into the face of the galaxy's most powerful empire. And while the commander had ordered the retreat once, out of respect for their tenacity, it was clear that humanity's defiance would not go unanswered. It was time to make them understand. Time to break their will. In the human bunkers, Marcus was still working with every ounce of energy he had. His bones ached, his mind was clouded with exhaustion, but he pushed through. There was no other choice. He was now more than just a symbol. He was the last chance for Earth to stand its ground. Every night he met with the other leaders. They talked about tactics, about the weaponry they had, about the weaknesses they had discovered. And every morning Marcus gave the orders. The resistance would strike first. They wouldn't wait for the aliens to make their move. They would show the universe that humanity wasn't just fighting for survival. They were fighting to win. And then, on the eve of the greatest battle in human history, Marcus stood alone on a hilltop, watching the sky darken once more. The ships had not yet moved, but he knew they would soon. As he looked to the stars, he whispered to himself, "Let them come. Let them see what Earth can do when it fights for its future." The first strike came at dawn. The night before, Marcus had assembled the resistance forces at a secret military compound hidden beneath the mountains. It was one of the last places untouched by the invaders, a place where they could regroup, strategize, and prepare for what was coming. Now, as the first rays of sunlight broke through the horizon, the world was ready. The war had begun. At the front lines, there was no longer any sense of hesitation or fear. There was only one emotion that coursed through every soldier, every civilian who had picked up arms: rage. The aliens had come to destroy them, to wipe them from existence, and humanity would not let that happen without a fight. The resistance had been working in secret, developing their new weapons from the knowledge they'd gathered of the alien technology. They had small, effective plasma-based rifles that could pierce the energy shields of the alien soldiers, and Marcus's weapon, the one he had invented, was modified to unleash even greater destruction. Earth's scientists had adapted it into a series of massive electromagnetic cannons, capable of destabilizing the alien ship's shields long enough to target the hulls beneath. It wasn't perfect, but it was their best shot. They had no choice but to make it work. As the resistance moved forward, Marcus stood at the center of the operation. His heart pounded with the same fear that gripped every soldier around him, but he didn't show it. His focus was razor sharp. The aliens weren't going to let humanity survive this time. They were going to come down hard. And if they couldn't fight the invaders' ships directly, then they would fight on the ground, where the aliens had no advantage. The first shots rang out as the alien forces descended, their ships making no noise as they hovered in the atmosphere. But the silence didn't last long. The aliens responded with devastating energy blasts that tore into the earth, gouging massive craters in the landscape. Buildings, homes, and military bases were obliterated in an instant. People screamed in terror as the earth itself trembled under the weight of the alien assault. But humanity didn't cower. Not this time. The resistance fired back with everything they had. The plasma rifles hissed and crackled as they shot through the air, piercing the alien armor. Some soldiers managed to hit their targets, knocking the alien troops off balance. It wasn't enough to stop them, but it was enough to slow them down, buying time for the heavier artillery to come into play. Far above the battlefield, the alien ships began to deploy their forces. Soldiers in armored suits dropped from the sky like rain, their bodies towering over the humans. The aliens were faster, stronger, and more advanced in technology than anything humanity had faced. But there was one thing they hadn't counted on: the will of the human race. On the ground, Marcus could hear the chaos all around him. His heart raced with every explosion, every roar of alien fire, but he kept moving forward, giving orders, keeping his people organized. He had to keep them alive. He had to make sure Earth had a chance. At the same time, something even more terrifying was unfolding. The alien fleet had begun to attack. Not with guns or bombs, but with something far worse. They were releasing bioengineered creatures, nightmarish beasts that swarmed in the air, their bodies like serpents, sharp teeth and claws ready to tear into anything they encountered. The creatures fell to Earth in flocks, screeching as they made contact. They were fast, deadly, and relentless, and they had no mercy. But humanity fought back. It wasn't just soldiers now, it was everyone. Farmers, doctors, teachers, children, all picked up whatever weapons they could find. The resistance became something more than a military operation. It became a movement. People no longer just fought for survival. They fought for their families, their homes, their planet. In the midst of the chaos, Marcus caught sight of an alien soldier standing tall, surveying the battlefield from a distance. The creature was unlike anything he had seen before, taller and more menacing than the others. Its armor was black, shining with an eerie glow, and its eyes, if they could be called that, were a deep, unsettling shade of red. This was the commander of the invasion, the one who had ordered the attack in the first place. And Marcus knew, without a doubt, that if he didn't stop this creature, the resistance wouldn't stand a chance. He pushed through the battlefield, moving towards the alien commander. Bullets and plasma blasts whizzed past him as he ducked and weaved, moving faster than he ever had before. His heart was in his throat, but his mind was focused. This was the moment that would decide everything. When Marcus finally reached the commander, they locked eyes for a brief, tense second. The alien raised its weapon, but Marcus was faster. He pulled his plasma rifle from its holster and fired, striking the commander's armor with a blast of blue energy. The impact threw the creature back, but it didn't fall. Instead, it roared in anger and retaliated with a blast of its own, sending Marcus flying backward, crashing into the dirt. For a moment, everything went silent. Marcus could taste blood in his mouth, and his body felt like it was made of stone. But he didn't have time to rest. He pushed himself to his feet, eyes burning with determination. If this was going to be the end, then he would make sure the invaders understood one thing. Earth was not to be underestimated. The alien commander lunged, its claws outstretched, but Marcus was ready. He fired again, hitting the creature's chest, and this time, the blast tore through the alien's armor, sending sparks flying. The creature staggered, faltering for a moment, and Marcus seized the opportunity. He dove for the commander's weapon, ripping it from the alien's hands. With all his strength, he swung the weapon around, striking the creature in the head. The blow was enough to finish the fight. As the alien commander crumpled to the ground, the remaining invaders hesitated. They had lost their leader. They had lost their advantage. And for the first time since the invasion began, humanity had a glimmer of hope. The tide of battle was turning, but it wasn't over, not by a long shot. The alien commander's fall was not just a defeat. It was a signal, a warning. The remaining invaders, seeing their leader crumple beneath the weight of humanity's defiance, paused. In that moment of uncertainty, the battlefield seemed to hold its breath, but only for a moment. The aliens did not retreat, and humanity's victory was far from secure. In the distance, Marcus could see the first signs of reinforcements, more ships, more soldiers, more monstrous creatures. The invasion had only begun to reveal its true scale. The alien army, though shaken by their leader's death, was far from defeated. They had lost one battle, but they would not lose the war. Marcus's pulse raced. His mind was a blur of strategy, of plans, of everything he had worked for. But there was no time to dwell on victory. He had barely a moment to catch his breath before the next wave came crashing down. With a roar, the remaining alien soldiers surged forward, their powerful frames cutting through the smoke and fire of the battlefield. The monstrous bio-creatures they had unleashed began to swarm again, this time in greater numbers. The resistance had no time to regroup. Soldiers fired their weapons, but the aliens advanced relentlessly, their shields absorbing the plasma blasts without hesitation. Marcus grabbed a nearby radio, his voice cutting through the chaos. "We need air support, now!" he barked, his words sharp with urgency. The radio crackled in response. "Air support is coming, but we're outnumbered. We need more time." Marcus clenched his jaw. Time was something they didn't have. Across the battlefield, the rest of the resistance was fighting valiantly, but it was clear they were outmatched. The alien technology, their speed, their strength, they were too much for humanity to handle alone. But that didn't stop the soldiers from fighting. Every soldier, every civilian, had one thing in common. They refused to give in. They refused to let their planet fall. And that determination wasn't just in the soldiers. Back at the command center, human leaders and scientists were scrambling to finish what Marcus had started. The electromagnetic cannons, the weapons, they weren't ready yet. The resistance was still relying on their smaller weapons, hoping for a miracle. But Marcus knew something had to change. He glanced at the sky again. The ships above were preparing their next strike. If they didn't hit back now, Earth would be lost. Then an idea hit him. Risky, dangerous, but it might just work. "Prepare the electromagnetic cannons. Aim for their ships," he shouted to the nearby soldiers, his voice shaking with the weight of the decision. "We're going for their command vessel. It's the heart of their fleet. Take it down, and the rest will fall." The soldiers looked at each other, some with confusion, others with disbelief. But they trusted Marcus. And when they saw the look in his eyes, they knew it was time. They couldn't afford to hesitate. A loud hum filled the air as the electromagnetic cannons powered up. Their energy surged, crackling with untamed power. Marcus watched, his hands tight on his weapon, as the cannons aimed toward the alien flagship hovering high above. There was a deep breath of anticipation, and then, boom! A blinding blue beam shot up from the cannons, hitting the alien command vessel square in the center. The ship shuddered, its shields flickering, but they didn't hold. The blast tore through the ship's defenses, causing massive explosions. The alien ship began to break apart, a catastrophic chain reaction spreading through its hull. For a brief, fleeting moment, the invaders hesitated again. But it was a moment of weakness, and the humans weren't about to waste it. The air support, led by the few remaining fighter jets left in Earth's arsenal, launched their attack. Guided missiles and bombs streaked through the sky, targeting the remaining alien ships and troops. The battle raged on. But just as humanity had begun to feel the stirrings of victory, the aliens revealed their trump card. From the shattered remains of the command vessel, a new figure emerged, a massive, towering being, far larger than any of the others. Its armor was a dark, shimmering red, and its eyes burned with an unholy fury. The creature was unlike anything the Resistance had ever faced. It was a warrior. The ground trembled as the being descended from the wreckage, its steps causing the earth to crack and splinter. It raised a weapon, a weapon unlike any human had seen, its blade glowing with an eerie light. It was a blade capable of cutting through anything, capable of tearing through the strongest of human defenses. This was the commander of the commanders, the true leader. And it had arrived to finish what its predecessors had started. Marcus watched in horror as the giant alien approached, its steps shaking the ground beneath him. The last remnants of his team were already struggling against the relentless alien assault. His heart raced, but his mind, sharp and focused, found its resolve. The alien warrior raised its blade. It was coming for him. "Everyone fall back!" Marcus shouted, but it was already too late. The massive warrior charged, its blade slashing through the air with incredible speed. Marcus barely dodged, his instincts taking over, but the force of the creature's attack sent him sprawling across the ground. His vision blurred, but he refused to give in. The creature swung again. Marcus rolled to his feet, grabbing his plasma rifle, firing a few desperate shots. But the alien's energy shield absorbed them effortlessly, and it raised its blade to strike once more. It was a move he couldn't dodge. In a split second, something deep within Marcus snapped. He couldn't let it end like this, not after everything. In a desperate final move, he launched himself at the creature, using the last of his strength to leap into the air, narrowly avoiding the blade's path. With a yell of pure rage, he grabbed the alien's arm and pulled it toward him, twisting the creature's massive weapon from its hands. For the first time, the warrior faltered, and Marcus knew that this was his chance. "Die, you bastard!" he screamed, as he drove his weapon into the alien's chest, the blast sending the creature stumbling back. But it wasn't enough to kill it. The alien fell to its knees, a low growl escaping its throat as it fought to regain its strength. Marcus raised his weapon once more, knowing that this was it. This was the moment that would determine Earth's fate. The alien warrior's breath was heavy, labored, its dark, glowing eyes filled with a mixture of rage and disbelief. Marcus could feel the heat of its hatred radiating toward him, but he didn't back down. He couldn't afford to. Not now. Not when Earth was on the brink of extinction. Not when the weight of every life was on his shoulders. He steadied his weapon, his finger on the trigger, his mind racing. This was it. One last strike, one last chance to end this nightmare. But even as he aimed, the warrior rose again, slower now, its movements more calculated. The alien had been wounded, but it was far from beaten. Its resilience was terrifying, a chilling reminder of how outmatched humanity truly was. And yet, Marcus didn't hesitate. With a guttural roar, the alien swung its massive fist toward him. Marcus barely dodged, feeling the air shift as the blow whooshed past him. His body was exhausted, his muscles aching from the constant battle, but his will was unbroken. He had one more move to make, one final attack. In the chaos of battle, as the ground shook and the sounds of war echoed in every corner of the world, something shifted. The resistance had gained ground. The fighters in the air, still clashing with the remaining alien ships, began to press forward with renewed vigor. The electromagnetic cannons, now fully powered, fired again and again, taking down ship after ship, slowly pushing the aliens back. They were retreating, their ranks thinning, but it wasn't enough. Marcus needed to finish the job. The warrior took another swing, this time catching Marcus off guard. It was faster than he had expected, its strength still terrifying despite the injuries. Marcus was sent flying through the air, crashing into a pile of debris. His vision swam, his body screaming in protest as he struggled to push himself upright. But his fingers found his rifle again, and he gritted his teeth, his heart pounding in his chest. "Come on," he muttered to himself, the words barely audible over the sounds of the battle. The alien advanced, its eyes locked onto Marcus, who was now on his knees, struggling to stay conscious. The warrior's blade glinted in the dying light of the day, sharp and deadly, and as it raised the weapon high, Marcus felt the weight of the moment crashing down on him. But then, something else happened. A deep, rumbling sound echoed from the sky. Marcus's eyes flickered upward, his heart leaping in his chest. The clouds parted, and through the chaos of smoke and fire, a massive shadow appeared. Another ship, larger than any that had come before it. The ship descended, its engines cutting through the air with a deafening roar. The alien warriors paused, looking up, uncertainty spreading across their faces. The massive craft hovered above the battlefield, its hull glowing with an ominous red light. For a moment, everything stopped. The aliens, the resistance, the beasts, all of them stood frozen, eyes locked on the descending ship. What was this? What had they brought now? The ship's hatch opened slowly, revealing an alien figure, larger than any Marcus had seen before. Its skin was an unnatural shade of pale blue, its features sharp and angular, exuding an aura of authority and power. The alien's eyes gleamed with intelligence, and something far more dangerous. This wasn't just another soldier. This was the general, the true leader behind the invasion. It stepped down onto the battlefield, its eyes sweeping across the chaos. It didn't speak. It didn't need to. The soldiers around it immediately knelt in respect, fear clearly etched into their expressions. The general raised its hand, and the aliens immediately halted their advance. A calm settled over the battlefield, but only for a moment. Marcus felt a surge of anger unlike anything he had ever felt before. This was the mastermind. This was the being that had condemned Earth to this hell. His fists clenched. He could not, would not, let this creature escape. Not now, not when everything they had fought for was at stake. The general's gaze landed on Marcus, and for the first time, Marcus saw it. The recognition. The alien knew him, knew what he had done, and it understood what he was capable of. Its lips curled into a sinister smile. "You are the one who killed my lieutenant." The general's voice was calm, almost amused. "Impressive. But do you really believe you can stop this?" Marcus stood tall, his body trembling from exhaustion and pain. He didn't care. He wasn't afraid. "You've underestimated humanity for the last time," he spat, his voice fierce. "We're not just going to roll over and die. You're going to regret ever stepping foot on this planet." The general's smile deepened, but it was clear. This alien was not a fool. It had come prepared for the final fight. Suddenly, with a movement that was so fast it almost seemed impossible, the general drew a long, jagged blade from its side. The energy around the blade crackled as it hummed with power, a weapon capable of cutting through anything. The alien's expression hardened, its eyes locked on Marcus, its movements almost predatory. The general stepped forward. With a primal roar, the creature lunged, its blade swinging down in a deadly arc. Marcus barely managed to dodge, rolling across the dirt, feeling the rush of air as the weapon sliced through the space where he had just been. His heart raced. Every instinct screamed at him to fight, to survive. But this was different. This was the final showdown, one that would decide the fate of humanity. The battle wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Marcus staggered to his feet, gripping his rifle with both hands. The weapon was nothing compared to the general's blade, but it was all he had. As the general lunged again, Marcus fired. A single shot rang out, the plasma blast lighting up the battlefield. It struck true. The general's blade clattered to the ground as the creature staggered, an expression of shock on its face. The alien didn't fall, but it hesitated. It was wounded, and that hesitation was all Marcus needed. With a roar of his own, he charged. The ground beneath him shook as he sprinted towards the general, his rifle raised, The last bit of energy in his body focused on ending this once and for all. The alien's eyes widened, and in that moment, Marcus knew. He wasn't just fighting for survival. He was fighting for humanity's future. He reached the general, slamming the butt of his rifle into its chest with everything he had left. The impact was enough to send the creature reeling backward, crashing into the dirt. Marcus wasted no time. He aimed, fired, and watched as the alien commander's body crumpled to the ground, lifeless. For a moment, there was silence, and then the sounds of victory began to echo across the battlefield. The battlefield was quiet. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, there was no sound of alien ships firing, no monstrous beasts roaring, no blasts of plasma or the cries of the wounded. The earth, scarred by the brutality of the invasion, seemed to exhale, as though it, too, was taking in the gravity of what had just occurred. Marcus stood over the fallen alien general, his body trembling with exhaustion, but his mind racing. He had done it. They had done it. Against all odds, Earth had fought back and won. But as the silence stretched, an uneasy feeling settled over him. Was this really over? Had humanity truly secured its place in the galaxy? Or was this just the beginning of another cycle of war and survival? His thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps approaching. He turned to see the rest of the resistance force making their way toward him, battered and bloodied, but alive. The soldiers, what remained of them, looked at him with a mixture of awe and disbelief. It was clear they, too, were still processing the enormity of what had just happened. General Teague, the commander of the Earth Defense Forces, limped up to Marcus, a weak but triumphant smile on his face. He extended a hand, and Marcus shook it firmly, knowing that this moment would be marked in history. It wasn't just his victory, it was theirs. The entire human race had stood united, defying the invaders, showing them the true power of resilience, of the human spirit. "We did it," General Teague said softly, his voice hoarse. Marcus nodded, but the weight of it all was too much. The toll of the battle, the lives lost, the cities destroyed. It was overwhelming. He looked down at the alien general's body, still sprawled across the dirt. "It's over," Marcus said, his voice distant. "But it doesn't feel like it should be." Teague placed a hand on his shoulder, understanding the depth of his emotions. "War never feels like victory, Marcus. Not when you see the cost." Marcus didn't reply. Instead, he turned his gaze to the sky. The remnants of the alien fleet, broken and burning, still drifted in the heavens above, a testament to the battle that had been fought. But it was clear that Earth had secured its future. They had made their statement. No one would dare challenge them again. In the weeks that followed, the world began its long, painful recovery. Governments rallied together to rebuild what had been torn apart. Cities that had once been reduced to rubble slowly started to rise again. The air was filled with the sounds of construction, of families coming together, of hope being rekindled. Humanity had proven that no matter how overwhelming the threat, they could persevere. But even as the world rebuilt, the truth hung heavy in the hearts of many. The aliens had come from a far-off galaxy, advanced beyond anything humanity had ever known, and they had been repelled. What did that mean for the future of Earth? What did it mean for the galaxy? Marcus stood in front of the memorial, looking at the names of those who had given everything for this victory. The resistance had lost so many. People he had known, people he had fought beside. He couldn't help but feel that they deserved more than just the empty words of thank you. They had given their lives for something much bigger than themselves, something that transcended borders, that united humanity for the first time in history. And now that unity had to carry forward. A voice interrupted his thoughts. It was General Teague again, standing beside him, looking down at the names etched in stone. "They were the real heroes," Teague said, his voice thick with emotion. "We might have led the charge, but it was the everyday people, citizens, workers, mothers, fathers, that made this happen." Marcus nodded. "We all played our part. But it feels like we're just scratching the surface. The war is over, but the galaxy is still out there. Who knows what else is waiting for us?" Teague sighed, a weary but determined look on his face. "We'll be ready. For anything. Humanity's greatest strength isn't our technology or our weapons. It's our will to survive, to keep fighting. That's what won us this war." Marcus smiled, but it was bittersweet. He knew that the world had changed forever. Humanity had proven itself. But at what cost? And now that the aliens knew the true strength of Earth, would they come again? Or had they learned a lesson too harsh to forget? "We'll keep fighting," Marcus said, his voice resolute. "For those we lost, for those we've yet to protect, and for the future we'll build. This isn't the end, it's just the beginning." As time passed, humanity started to change. No longer isolated and divided, Earth now had a shared purpose. People who had once fought for their countries, their own survival, now looked toward the stars with a new sense of unity. The threat of the alien invaders had done what nothing else had been able to. It had united the world in a way nothing ever could before. But even as the planets and the stars beckoned, Marcus knew that peace was fragile. The universe was vast and filled with unknowns. But Earth had proven something important. Humanity could fight back. Humanity would fight back. And as Marcus stood at the edge of the rebuilt city, looking up at the sky, he knew that Earth's message had been heard. The stars above were silent now, but the echo of Earth's defiance would be felt across the galaxy for generations to come. Attack again and face total annihilation. Humanity had spoken. The universe would listen. And Earth was no longer just a blue dot in the vastness of space. It was a force to be reckoned with. The galactic armada hovered on the edges of the Sol system, an endless sea of warships blotting out the stars. Hundreds of worlds had fallen to them, entire civilizations crushed beneath their advance. Now it was Earth's turn. The high command of the invaders had expected immediate surrender. After all, no species had ever survived an encounter with their fleet. Their technology was superior. Their numbers were overwhelming. Their weapons could reduce planets to molten rock in hours. Yet when their ultimatum was sent, humanity's response was not surrender. It was a single ship. One ship. Not a fleet. Not an armada of its own. Just one vessel, barely the size of a destroyer, painted in deep black with no insignias, no markings. It drifted out from Earth's orbit, heading straight for the enemy's lines. In the command center of the invasion force, Supreme Admiral Vorlon of the Dominion watched the feed with disbelief. He turned to his second-in-command, a reptilian officer with jagged plates running down his spine. "Are they mocking us?" Vorlon growled. His officer hesitated. It appears so, Supreme Admiral. No species has ever responded like this before." The crew on the bridge remained silent, each of them exchanging uneasy glances. They had razed empires, crushed resistance fleets that numbered in the thousands. Yet this was something they had never seen before. Vorlon slammed his fist against the console. "Fools! They think one ship can stand against us?" He sneered, baring his fangs. "Prepare the fleet. I want that vessel destroyed. Send a message to their leaders. Let them know this insult will cost them dearly." At that moment, the mysterious human ship hailed them. A holographic projection flickered to life on the command deck, revealing a human officer clad in a dark uniform. His expression was unreadable, his eyes sharp and cold. "This is Captain Darius Kane of the UHS Revenant," he said, his voice calm, almost casual. "I'm here to negotiate your surrender." Laughter erupted across the command deck. Officers sneered. Some outright doubled over with amusement. Surrender? The idea was ludicrous. Vorlon leaned forward, his massive form casting a shadow over the projection. "You dare speak to me of surrender, human? You face the might of the Dominion? We have reduced entire civilizations to ashes. Your planet will burn like all the rest." Captain Kane didn't blink. His voice remained steady. "You misunderstand, Admiral. I'm not asking for our surrender. I'm offering you yours." The laughter died instantly. A silence, deep and thick, settled over the bridge. Vorlon's eyes narrowed. He had faced enemies who bluffed before, who made bold declarations in the face of doom. This felt different. "You are either the bravest or the most foolish creature I have ever encountered," Vorlon said. "Tell me, Captain, what makes you think you stand a chance against us?" Kane leaned slightly forward, and for the first time, a faint smile touched his lips. "Because you don't understand what this ship is." Without another word, the transmission cut off. Vorlon roared in fury. "Fire! Destroy that ship!" The command was given, and 100 Dominion warships opened fire. Beams of raw energy, missiles and kinetic projectiles streaked toward the lone vessel. A barrage that could wipe out an entire fleet. Then, something impossible happened. The Revenant didn't evade. It didn't even attempt to raise shields. Instead, it simply moved, just a fraction of an inch, before vanishing entirely. Not cloaking. Not teleportation. It was as if reality itself had folded around it. The incoming fire passed harmlessly through empty space where the ship had been. Before anyone could react, the Revenant reappeared behind the lead warship of the Dominion's vanguard. A single shot was fired, a small pulse of violet energy. The Dominion warship, a vessel 5 times its size, didn't explode. It didn't even burn. It simply ceased to exist. One moment it was there. Then it was gone. No debris, no wreckage, just nothing. The bridge of the Dominion's command ship erupted into chaos. Officers shouted, scanning their sensors, trying to understand what had happened. It wasn't destroyed," one of the tactical officers stammered. "It was erased." Vorlon felt a chill crawl up his spine. He turned to his second-in-command. "How is this possible?" No answer came. Across the battlefield, the Revenant moved again. Every shot fired at it missed, not because it dodged, but because it seemed to exist just outside of reality itself. And with every move, it erased another ship. One by one, entire battleships disappeared without a trace. It was not fighting. It was not even war. It was extermination. Vorlon clenched his fists. What have we awakened?" Then another transmission came through. Captain Kane's face appeared once more, the faintest trace of amusement in his gaze. "I'll give you one last chance," Kane said. "Surrender." Vorlon's throat went dry. Never in all his campaigns had he encountered something like this. Never had he felt what he felt now. Fear. His species had believed themselves the apex predators of the galaxy, unstoppable, invincible. And yet, in the span of minutes, one human ship had rewritten everything. The Dominion had sent thousands of warships, expecting an easy victory. Humanity had sent just one, and it was more than enough. The Revenant hovered in the void, silent and unmoving, as if daring the Dominion fleet to make another move. But no one fired. No one even spoke. Fear had settled over the enemy command deck like a suffocating fog. Vorlon clenched his fists, his mind racing. Every instinct screamed at him to order a full retreat. And yet, he knew what that would mean. The Dominion had never retreated before. Surrender was unthinkable. To go back, to admit that they had been bested by a single human ship, would destroy their reputation. His people would demand an explanation. His superiors would see it as weakness. They would strip him of his rank, if not worse. But what choice did he have? Another Dominion ship vanished from existence, erased with the same eerie precision as before. The Revenant hadn't moved. It hadn't fired visible weapons. It simply decided that the ship no longer existed. Vorlon's officers looked at him now, their gazes filled with something he had never seen before. Pleading. They wanted him to call for retreat. They wanted him to save them. Captain Kane's voice cut through the silence like a blade. "I'll ask one last time, Admiral." His voice remained calm, but there was an edge to it now. Surrender. Vorlon's throat tightened. His entire career, his entire life, had been built on the belief that the Dominion was superior to all others. They had conquered 100 worlds. They had crushed civilizations beneath their heel. And yet here they were, brought to their knees by a single ship, a warship unlike anything they had ever seen. He forced himself to speak. We do not surrender." Kane sighed. "Then you leave me no choice." The screen cut out. Then the Revenant moved. If what it had done before was terrifying, what happened next was incomprehensible. The ship flickered. One moment it was in front of them, the next it was behind them. Then above, then below. It didn't move like any ship should. It didn't obey physics, didn't play by the rules of space. It existed where it wanted, when it wanted. A Dominion battlecruiser, one of their most powerful ships, fired a desperate barrage. The moment the weapons were discharged, the Revenant split. Not into 2 ships, not into 3, into thousands, each copy identical, each one perfect. Sensors couldn't tell which was real, which was fake, if any of them were fake at all. Vorlon's hands trembled as the wave of Revenants swarmed his fleet, encircling them in every direction. The Dominion ships opened fire in blind panic, but it was useless. The shots passed through some of the ships as if they weren't even there, while others vanished only to reappear somewhere else entirely. Then, the real attack began. Vorlon watched in horror as entire capital ships collapsed into themselves, crushed as if by an invisible force. Other ships blinked out of existence, their crews screaming over the comms before they were snuffed out. One ship was twisted, not destroyed, not erased, but warped into a shape that was no longer recognizable. The hull crumpled like paper. Metal and flesh fused together, the screams of the crew distorting into an unnatural, gurgling wail before the wreck drifted away, lifeless. This was not war. This was annihilation. The Revenant was toying with them. It could have ended them in an instant, but it wanted them to understand, to fear. Vorlon's mind broke. His pride, his belief in Dominion superiority. It was all gone. There was no hope, no escape. "Stop," he gasped. "Please, stop." The Revenant halted. All of the copies, all of the flickering impossibilities vanished in an instant, leaving only the one original ship. Another transmission opened. Captain Kane stared at him, expression unreadable. "You're ready to talk now," Kane said. It wasn't a question. Vorlon swallowed hard. What is this ship?" Kane leaned back slightly. "A message." Vorlon shook his head. "No ship can do this. No technology can do this." Kane gave a small, knowing smile. "That's because it isn't just technology." The words sent a chill through Vorlon's bones. He had assumed that the Revenant was simply an advanced warship, something beyond their understanding. But what if it was more? What if it wasn't just a weapon, but a warning? "What do you want?" Vorlon whispered. Kane's smile faded. "We want you to understand." "Understand what?" The human captain leaned forward. When he spoke, there was something different in his voice. Something ancient. "You thought you were the apex predators of this galaxy," Kane said, "but you never truly met us." Vorlon's breathing grew shallow. Kane continued. "Every species you conquered, every world you burned, they weren't like us. They were prey. You never fought an actual predator before." A pause. "You have now." Vorlon felt the weight of those words settle over him, congestured at the wreckage of his once mighty fleet. "You came to take our world, to burn it, to crush it like all the others. You thought you knew what we were." The Revenant's engines flared, and for the first time, a glimpse of something vast and incomprehensible seemed to pulse beneath its hull. Kane's next words were barely above a whisper. "You have no idea." The transmission cut. Vorlon's body sagged in his chair. He had spent his entire life believing in the might of the Dominion, in their unchallenged supremacy. Now, all of that was gone, because the truth was undeniable. Humanity had sent one ship, and it was more than enough. Silence stretched across the Dominion fleet, a silence thick with fear and disbelief. The Revenant hung motionless in space, as if waiting, watching. It had torn through their ships like a god plucking wings from insects, yet it had stopped. Not out of mercy, Vorlon realized, but out of something far worse. It wanted them to learn. His mind reeled. His fleet, once the pride of the Dominion, had been reduced to scraps, their numbers dwindling with every breath. Every attempt at retaliation had been meaningless. Every maneuver had been countered before it had even begun. The Revenant did not fight as any warship should, because it was not a warship, not in the way Vorlon understood. It was something else. "Supreme Admiral," one of his officers whispered, her voice barely audible. What do we do?" He had no answer. Then, the Revenant moved again. It wasn't an attack. There was no weapon discharge, no visible energy signature. Yet one of their remaining dreadnoughts simply collapsed. One moment it was there, a towering behemoth of steel and firepower. The next it was smaller, shrinking. Its hull imploded, its structure twisting in on itself as though an invisible hand had crushed it to a fraction of its former size. The Dominion officers aboard screamed, their voices cutting off as the ship condensed into a single blackened sphere no larger than a fighter craft. Then it was gone, not destroyed, not even erased, reduced. Vorlon felt cold horror settle into his bones. He had seen countless weapons, witnessed the power of planetary bombardments, the fury of antimatter warheads. But this was something that should not exist. "This isn't war," he muttered. Kane's voice returned, sharp and steady. "Number it's not." Vorlon turned, his hands curling into fists. "Then what is it?" he demanded. Kane leaned forward, his expression unreadable. "This is what happens when you mistake patience for weakness." The words struck deep. For centuries, the Dominion had expanded unchecked. They had crushed world after world, silencing every resistance before it could become a threat. They had seen themselves as conquerors, the natural rulers of the stars, and humanity had waited, watched, allowed them to think Earth was just another target. Kane's expression darkened. "You never asked why we never expanded, why we never reached for the stars like the others you crushed." Vorlon had never considered the question. He had assumed, like the rest of the Dominion, that humanity was simply behind in development. Now that assumption was unraveling before his eyes. "We never expanded," Kane said, "because we didn't need to." The Revenant pulsed, A deep, unnatural hum filled the comms. Not a sound, but a presence. Something that dug into the bones and settled behind the eyes. A feeling of something vast, something old. Kane's voice was quiet, almost gentle. Do you know what happens when a species is forced to survive, generation after generation without mercy? Without a safety net? When every predator, every force of nature, every cruel twist of fate exists to kill them? Vorlon swallowed. Kane's eyes burned cold. They become something else. The Revenant rippled. Vorlon's sensors flared with warnings. Energy signatures spiked beyond measurable levels. Space itself seemed to bend around the human ship, the stars behind it warping, shifting, as if reality itself struggled to contain whatever was waking inside. Something was wrong. Something was... Then the screaming started. Not from his crew, from the ship. The Dominion's flagship, his own vessel, screamed. Metal groaned. Hull plating shuddered as if it were alive, writhing beneath unseen pressure. Warning sirens blared across the bridge, but no one moved. No one could. Because they felt it. Something was reaching inside the ship. Not a weapon, not a force, something worse. Vorlon's vision blurred. His head pounded, his senses fracturing under the weight of something pressing against his mind. He heard whispers. No. Thoughts. Not his own. Memories. Not his. A battlefield. A trench. Cold, wet mud clinging to skin. Explosions overhead. A man screaming in pain, holding his guts inside his stomach as artillery fire ripped through the sky. Another image. Darkness. A ruined city. A starving child gnawing on something unthinkable just to stay alive. 1,000 moments of survival. 1,000 horrors endured. And then, a singular unified thought that echoed through it all. We survive. No matter the cost. Vorlon gasped as he was released, stumbling back. His vision cleared, but the weight of what he had felt remained, pressing against the edges of his mind. Kane watched him. Now you understand. Vorlon's breaths came fast and uneven. His officers were shaking. One had collapsed, her eyes wide with terror. Kane didn't move, didn't blink. We weren't always this, he said, but the universe is cruel. It forces change. We don't have the strongest ships. We don't have the greatest numbers. We never did. The Revenant shifted, its form distorting for the briefest moment, as if what they were seeing was merely a fraction of what truly existed beneath. Kane's voice was barely above a whisper. But we learned how to win. Vorlon couldn't speak. The Dominion had faced countless enemies. They had won every war. But this was not a war they could win, because they had not invaded a planet. They had awoken something else entirely. Kane exhaled slowly, as if giving them time to let the realization sink in. This is your only chance, Admiral. Vorlon stared at him. Kane's gaze sharpened. Run! The transmission cut. The Revenant did not fire again, did not move to erase them. It simply watched. And Vorlon did the only thing left to do. Full retreat, he whispered. No one argued. No one hesitated. The remaining ships turned and fled, leaving the ruined remnants of their fleet behind. As they jumped to FTL, Vorlon cast one last look at the Revenant. It remained there, unmoving, waiting, and for the first time in Dominion history, they ran. The Dominion fleet fled like wounded beasts, their once proud warships limping into the void, engines burning hot as they pushed beyond their limits. Some of the vessels sparked and sputtered, their hulls scorched, systems failing. Others simply vanished into hyperspace, their commanders too terrified to even check their bearings before making the jump. Supreme Admiral Vorlon sat in silence aboard his battered flagship, hands gripping the armrests of his command chair so tightly that his claws had punctured the metal. His officers barely breathed, their gazes locked on the displays showing the human warship still hovering in the black abyss behind them. It had not followed. It had not fired another shot. It didn't need to. The Revenant had let them go, and that was far worse than destruction. A slow, shuddering breath left Vorlon's lips. His mind still reeled from the horrors he had felt. The memories that were not his own. The screams, the blood, the endless cycle of suffering that had forged humanity into something beyond mere flesh and bone. They had not won against humans. They had been permitted to live. A Dominion officer stumbled forward, his voice breaking. "Supreme Admiral, what do we tell the High Council?" The question twisted in Vorlon's gut like a blade. For centuries, the Dominion had marched unchallenged across the stars, their conquests leaving empires in ruin. They were the galaxy's apex predators. The thought of explaining what had happened here, of admitting that a single human ship had utterly dismantled their might, was inconceivable. And yet, it had happened. The Dominion was not supreme. The truth was clear. They had not conquered humanity. Humanity had allowed them to exist. A sharp, metallic hum filled the air as the ship's comms flared to life once more. Every officer stiffened, their bodies going rigid. None of them had activated the system. Yet the screen flickered. And there he was, Captain Kane. The human's face was calm, unreadable, but there was something different in his eyes now. Something almost pitiful. "I imagine this isn't an easy moment for you," Kane said. His voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of something deeper. "Coming to terms with the fact that you were never the most dangerous thing in the galaxy." Vorlon swallowed, his throat dry. Kane continued. "The Dominion has spent centuries crushing others. You saw yourself as untouchable, invincible. But the truth is," he exhaled slowly, "you were never alone in the dark." Silence filled the bridge. The Dominion officers stared at the screen, waiting, dreading. "We let you believe you were the apex predator," Kane said, "because you were never worth the fight." A chill swept through Vorlon's body. Kane's gaze sharpened. "Until now." The words settled like a weight in the room, heavy and final. Kane leaned slightly forward. "This is how it's going to be. You're going to return to your people. You're going to lie. You'll tell them whatever you need to tell them. Say you fought something unknown. Say you lost to a superior force beyond comprehension, but you will not speak of Earth." Vorlon's jaw clenched. "You will not return." Kane's voice was flat, absolute. "You will not send scouts. You will not attempt revenge if a single Dominion vessel so much as scans Sol's borders again." The Revenant pulsed. For the briefest moment, the stars behind it shuddered. The fabric of space itself bent as if recoiling from whatever the ship truly was. Kane didn't smile, didn't threaten. He simply promised. "If you come back," he said softly, "you won't get to run next time." Vorlon's breathing was ragged, his pulse thundering in his ears. Kane tilted his head slightly, as if studying him. "You still don't understand, do you?" The Dominion Admiral forced himself to speak, his voice hoarse. What are you?" Kane's gaze never wavered. "The last survivors," he said. "The ones who adapted, the ones who never broke, the ones who learned that the only way to win is to be something that can't lose." His words hung in the air, a cold truth that settled deep in Vorlon's chest. Then the transmission cut, and the Revenant vanished. Not with a jump, not with a flash of light. It simply ceased to exist. as if it had never been there at all. A hollow silence filled the Dominion flagship. No one moved, no one spoke. Vorlon exhaled shakily and turned to his officers. His voice was barely a whisper. "We are never coming back here." The crew nodded, some too afraid to even meet his eyes. Without another word, the Dominion ships disappeared into the void, leaving behind only wreckage, silence, and the lingering knowledge that something far worse than them existed in the universe, and it had just let them live. For now. The journey back to Dominion space was silent. No one spoke. No one dared. The remnants of the once mighty fleet limped through hyperspace, their hulls battered, their crews broken. These were not warriors returning home in triumph. These were survivors, and survivors did not celebrate. Supreme Admiral Vorlon sat in his quarters, staring at the holographic star map flickering before him. His hands trembled slightly, the first physical sign of weakness he had ever allowed himself. He clenched his fists, trying to steady them. It didn't help. His mind was still trapped in the moment when the Revenant had looked at them. Not in a way that an enemy does in war, not even in the way a conqueror looks at the conquered. The ship, no, the thing, had observed them the way a predator watches an animal that wandered too close to the edge of the forest. A simple warning. Leave. Now, and they had. The door to his quarters hissed open. Vorlon didn't need to look up to know who it was. His second-in-command, Commander Jovar, stepped forward, his movements slow and hesitant. That was new. Jovar had always been the most ruthless among his officers, a man who had relished every war, every conquest. Now he looked smaller. "We are 2 hours from the High Council's chambers," Jovar said, his voice quiet. Vorlon exhaled slowly. "And?" Jovar hesitated. "They will demand an explanation." Of course they would. The Dominion had never suffered a defeat like this before. Never had an entire invasion force been shattered without even wounding the enemy. The High Council would demand to know why. They would demand answers. They would demand retribution. Vorlon closed his eyes. "We tell them nothing of Earth." Jovar shifted uncomfortably. "Admiral, do you really believe we can hide this?" Vorlon opened his eyes, his gaze sharp. "We must." Jovar's throat bobbed as he swallowed. "They will demand we return. A fleet 10 times the size. We are not going back." Vorlon's voice was steel. A pause. Then, softer. "You felt it too, didn't you?" Jovar said nothing. He didn't have to. The memories, the visions, that impossible force pressing against their minds. Every single officer who had been on the bridge, who had seen the Revenant's true nature, had felt it. The truth. They had not encountered advanced technology. They had encountered a warning. Vorlon leaned forward, his voice lowering to a whisper. "We tell them we were defeated by something beyond our understanding. We tell them we barely escaped. We tell them to never return." Jovar hesitated. "And if they do not listen?" Vorlon's fingers tapped against the table. "Then the Dominion will burn." Jovar's jaw tightened. "We should have never gone there." Vorlon let out a slow, shuddering breath. "We shouldn't have." A silence settled between them. Then the ship shuddered as they exited hyperspace. They had arrived. The High Council's chamber was a towering hall of obsidian and gold, built to remind all who stood within it of the Dominion's absolute power. The council members sat in a raised semicircle, their faces hidden behind ceremonial masks of polished black steel. Only their glowing eyes, burning reds, blues, and violets, were visible beneath the metal. Vorlon knelt before them, Jovar at his side. A voice boomed from above. "Supreme Admiral Vorlon, You stand before this council in disgrace." The words hit like a physical blow. Disgrace. No Dominion admiral had ever heard such a word spoken to them before. Vorlon lifted his head slightly. You lost an invasion force of thousands," another counselor interrupted, his voice laced with fury. "An armada strong enough to conquer an entire sector, destroyed before even reaching the enemy homeworld." "We must return," another voice snarled. "Send a fleet of 5,000, 10,000. Wipe these insects from existence." Vorlon closed his eyes. They didn't understand. They couldn't. The Dominion had always believed strength was the answer. If they lost a battle, they sent a larger force. If they faced resistance, they crushed it without mercy. But this was different. This was not a war they could win. "This enemy is beyond us," Vorlon said finally. The chamber fell silent. Then laughter. Low, cold, mocking. A counselor leaned forward, his glowing violet eyes narrowing. "Beyond us?" Another scoffed. "The Supreme Admiral of the Dominion speaks as if he is afraid." Vorlon's claws dug into his palms. "I am afraid." The laughter stopped. Silence, uncomfortable, heavy. Never before had an admiral of the Dominion admitted fear. One of the counselors leaned forward. "Explain." Vorlon exhaled. "We did not lose to superior numbers. We did not lose to stronger weapons. We lost because the enemy is not like us." A murmur spread through the chamber. "They do not fight as we do," Vorlon continued. "They do not think as we do. They are something else." He hesitated. Then he spoke the words that had been haunting him since the moment they had fled. "We have never fought a true predator before." A pause. The counselors studied him, their glowing eyes unblinking. Finally, one of them spoke. "You expect us to believe that one human warship defeated the greatest armada the Dominion has ever assembled?" Vorlon's eyes darkened. "It wasn't a warship." That made them pause. "Then what was it?" Vorlon's voice was barely above a whisper. "A message." A long silence filled the chamber. The counselors exchanged glances. Even they, in all their arrogance, could sense that something was deeply wrong. Finally, one of them leaned forward. "Then we will not return." It was not a question. It was a decree. The decision was made. No Dominion ship would ever set course for Sol again. They would not challenge humanity, not because of diplomacy, not because of fear of war, but because, for the first time in Dominion history, they had found something that could end them. Forever. The decision was made. The Dominion would never return. But Vorlon knew it wasn't over. Even as the High Council decreed that Sul would remain untouched, he could see the unease in their eyes. They did not understand what had happened. They only knew fear, and fear had a way of fading with time. He had seen it before. Wars forgotten, warnings ignored. The Dominion was a machine of conquest. It was only a matter of time before their hunger overpowered their caution. And when that day came, they would all die. 3 cycles passed. 3 cycles of silence. For the first time in Dominion history, expansion stopped. No new invasions were launched. No new wars were declared. The fleets patrolled their existing territories, but they did not advance. And yet, the whispers grew. Other species, once terrified of the Dominion, had begun to take notice. The once unstoppable war machine had halted. Empires that had cowered in fear now whispered of rebellion. Sectors once locked in Dominion control began to push at their borders. Weakness. That was how the rest of the galaxy saw it. And weakness was not tolerated. A hidden chamber beneath the Dominion capital. 7 figures sat around a black stone table, their faces shrouded in shadow. They were not members of the High Council. They did not wear ceremonial masks or robes of state. They were something older, something deeper, the ones who pulled the strings from the darkness. "The Supreme Admiral's report is unacceptable," one of them murmured. "He speaks of impossible things," another hissed. "Ships that erase existence, weapons that defy physics, a war fought without battle." A heavy pause. "If true," a third voice rasped, "then we have made a mistake." Silence, then a cold laugh. A figure leaned forward, their glowing crimson eyes narrowing. "You are all fools." The others turned. "This is not fear," the crimson-eyed figure continued. "This is weakness." One of the others hesitated. "You do not believe the reports?" "Oh, I believe them," the figure sneered. "I believe every word, and I believe we should never have run." A ripple of unease passed through the chamber. "If what Vorlon says is true, then this humanity is the greatest threat the Dominion has ever faced," the crimson-eyed figure said. "And what do we do with threats?" A slow, cruel smile spread beneath the shadows. "We eliminate them." A pause. Then another voice. "The High Council will not authorize an attack." The figure laughed. "The High Council is nothing. Puppets. They see only what we allow them to see." A long silence. Then a single question. "What do you propose?" The crimson-eyed figure leaned forward, their voice dripping with malice. "We send another fleet," gasps. "Not to conquer, not to fight. We do not send thousands of warships to burn their world." The figure's eyes gleamed. "We send one." Another silence. Then a slow nod. The decision was made. The Dominion would return to Sol. But this time, it would not be an invasion. It would be an experiment. To understand what humanity truly was, to learn their secrets, and to prepare for the war that would come, one that would decide the fate of the galaxy itself. Deep in the void, where no light reached, something stirred, a shadow of war, a whisper of something vast and hungry. The Revenant had been a message, but humanity had more than one message to send. And this time, when the Dominion returned, they would not be the only ones watching. The Dominion's second expedition to Sol was not a fleet. It was a single vessel, a sleek black warship unlike any that had ever been constructed before. A vessel designed with one purpose, not to conquer, not to fight, but to understand. The High Council had forbidden another attack. The Dominion's military leaders had sworn never to return. But those who operated in the shadows, the ones who truly ruled, had no interest in fear. They sought knowledge, because knowledge was power. And if humanity truly was the greatest threat the Dominion had ever faced, then power was the only path forward. The ship was named Observer, a fitting name for something designed to watch, to learn, to record. But beneath the surface, it was something else entirely. A test, a trap, an experiment designed to provoke a response, to draw out humanity's secrets, to force them to reveal what they were hiding. If the Revenant was truly the apex of human warcraft, then the Observer would be the bait. And when the monster came to feed, the Dominion would see. Captain Ralvek stood at the bridge of the Observer, his clawed hands resting on the sleek metal console before him. The ship's systems hummed softly, their whispers filling the silence of the void. They had arrived at the edge of Sol's borders. No alarms sounded, no defenses activated, no fleet emerged to meet them. Ralvek narrowed his eyes. "Are we being detected?" The ship's tactical officer, a wiry creature with piercing yellow eyes, hesitated. "Scans show no immediate response. No energy spikes, no active targeting systems." Ralvek frowned. "They see us." It wasn't a question. He knew it as surely as he knew the weight of his own bones. Earth knew they were here. And yet, no response. A trick? A display of arrogance? Or something far worse? Ralvek turned to his communications officer. "Send the message." A single pulse of data shot out into the darkness, carried on encrypted Dominion frequencies. It was a simple transmission. A greeting, a challenge, a test. Ralvek exhaled slowly. Now there was nothing left to do but wait. Wait to see if the monster would come. Hours passed. The void remained silent. And then, without warning, something changed. Not an alarm, not a weapon discharge, a feeling. The bridge lights dimmed. The air grew heavier. A low, almost imperceptible hum filled the walls of the ship. Not from their own systems, but from something else. Something outside. Ralvek's claws twitched. "Report," he ordered, keeping his voice steady. His sensors officer paled. "Sir, I don't know how to explain this." Ralvek turned sharply. "Try." The officer swallowed. We didn't detect anything. No ship, no energy signatures, but what?" The officer hesitated. Then, in a slow, trembling voice, he whispered, "We are not alone." Ralvek's spine stiffened. "What do you mean?" The officer tapped a control on his console, bringing up a visual feed. The screen displayed only the empty void, the blackness of space stretching infinitely in all directions. No enemy ship. No fleet. Nothing. But then, Ralvek's breath caught. A shadow, not a shape, not an object. A shadow moved across the stars, blotting them out, a shifting darkness that had no form, no edges. It was not a ship, it was not anything, and yet it was there. Ralvek's mouth went dry. Then, a voice, not over the comms, not through their systems. It spoke inside his mind. "You were warned." The bridge trembled. The walls groaned. The hum grew louder, like 1,000 whispering voices crawling just beneath the surface of reality. Ralvek's officers gasped, some clutching their heads, others falling to their knees. The shadow moved. And then, something stepped through it. It was not the Revenant. But it was like the Revenant. A ship, if it could even be called that, emerged from the darkness, its surface shifting, its hull shimmering like liquid obsidian. No visible weapons, no lights, no engines, just the weight of its presence pressing down on them like gravity itself. Ralvek's heart pounded. "Open communications." A deep, unearthly pulse rippled through the ship's systems. Then, a face appeared on the screen. Not Kane, someone else, a woman, dark eyes, sharp, unreadable. Ralvek's blood ran cold. She did not speak. She studied him, as if deciding something. Finally, her lips parted. Her voice was soft, and yet it carried the force of something ancient. "You shouldn't have come back." Ralvek's mouth opened, and the observer screamed, the ship itself. The walls bent, the metal twisting as if it were alive. Lights flickered, screens cracked, the floor beneath them shuddered like something was inside it, moving through it. His officers screamed. Ralvek felt it, felt something reach into his mind. Memories, thoughts, torn from him like pages ripped from a book. The woman's voice echoed, not just in his ears but in the depths of his consciousness. "You don't understand what we are." Ralvek gasped, his vision swimming, his very self unraveling beneath the weight of something greater, something beyond comprehension. Then, the darkness collapsed, the shadow swallowed itself, folding inward like a void, and the observer was alone. The ship was intact, the crew was unharmed, but something was wrong. Ralvek trembled, his breaths ragged, his hands clenched into fists, his claws digging into his palms to keep himself grounded. The woman's voice still echoed in his mind. Not a threat, not a warning, a simple, chilling truth. "You don't understand what we are?" Ralvek turned to his crew. Their faces were pale, their eyes hollow. He knew what he had to do. They had come to learn humanity's secrets, and they had learned one. Something far worse than war. Something far worse than death. He took a shaking breath. "Take us home." The observer turned, engines flaring. It fled the Sol system, and the Dominion would never return. Because for the first time in their existence, they had seen something that made them afraid to even ask the question, what was humanity? The observer fled through the dark, leaving Sul behind. But Sul did not leave them. Ralvek sat in silence as the ship's engines burned at full power, his mind still reeling from what had happened. His officers were hollow-eyed, their expressions empty, haunted. They had not been attacked, they had not been harmed, but they had been seen. And something about that was worse than death. The woman's voice still echoed in Ralvek's mind. "You don't understand what we are." And now he understood that he never would. No Dominion scientist, no strategist, no warlord could make sense of what they had witnessed. The Revenant had been terrifying, yes, a weapon of impossible power. But this had been something beyond power. They had gone to provoke humanity, to test their response, and humanity had answered, not with war, not with words, but with something far, far worse. A glimpse of something the Dominion could never comprehend. Ralvek exhaled slowly, his hands trembling as they hovered over the console. The High Council would demand a report. The shadow rulers of the Dominion would want to know what had happened. But what could he tell them? That they had looked into the abyss, and that the abyss had smiled? He clenched his fists. Number. They would never understand. The Dominion had spent centuries believing they were the apex of the galaxy, the ultimate force of nature. They had ruled through strength, through fear, through conquest. But humanity did not conquer. Humanity did not rule. Humanity simply was, and the universe bent around them. Ralvek took a slow, shuddering breath. He knew what he had to do. When the observer finally re-entered Dominion space, he would not deliver the report they expected. He would erase everything. Every scan, every recording, every trace of what had happened at Sol. He would delete the logs. He would silence the crew. And then he would disappear. Because the greatest mercy he could grant the Dominion was ignorance. If they ever returned, if they ever tried to understand, they would not survive the answer. The Dominion never spoke of Earth again, not in their archives, not in their war councils, not in the whispers of their spies, as if Sul had never existed, as if humanity had never existed, as if, somewhere deep in the void, a truth too terrible to name waited in silence, patient and unchallenged, a truth that had been ignored, a truth that had been forgotten, and a truth that for the sake of all things must never be remembered.